And we're live. I'm Terry Cook. You're watching Hamilton's Vital Signs, and we're here to talk about why food matters. And before we do that, we have to talk a little bit about basketball, because one of our guests and I are both basketball junkies, and of course, last night, and this thing will be replayed so people will be confused about the timing, was maybe the greatest Game 7, certainly in my living memory. Nick, Saul?
I couldn't believe what I witnessed on that court. That LeBron block of Iguodala that set the tone for that three-pointer by Kyrie Irving. Whoa! I was totally into
Go
it.
figure.
Yeah.
So Nick, Saul, Community Food Centers Canada, and Denise Arkell from Neighbor to Neighbor. It, on a serious note, strikes me that talking about why food matters is particularly, I think, appropriate now. We're reading about food riots in Venezuela. We live in a country and a community with great abundance. If I go to the grocery store, I can get any number of remarkable products that wouldn't have been imaginable a generation ago, and yet many people in this community continue to be food insecure. Food bank usage is at an all-time high, and I think people are starting to question the basic premise and the importance of food in transforming lives. So I want to talk to both of you about the important roles that you're playing here with an exciting new project in Hamilton. And Denise, this is your home court, even though you're not a basketball person.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about the history of Neighbor to Neighbor, and specifically how the Community Food Center concept and project is going to transform what you do and hopefully transform the lives that you're involved with here.
Right, Terry. About 30 years ago, Neighbor to Neighbor developed, originally as a food bank, but interestingly enough, they did have a community garden site with 70 plots in it, because even then they started thinking about providing good nutritional food to clients and having clients have the ability to grow and produce their own food of their liking. So since that time, of course, we've grown based on the needs of our community on Hamilton Mountain, and we've become a multi-service agency providing 21 different services. Some we provide ourselves and some we do in collaboration with others in the city. They fall under really three categories: community food, which we're talking about today, our family services programs that entail counseling and financial literacy and energy support, et cetera. And then our third area is really our prevention area, which is basically our tutoring program that we have done for the last 14 years. And the reason, actually, I mean, we really started into prevention 14 years ago because we thought we wanted to change the future, and we knew we couldn't do that with what we are presently doing. And so, interestingly enough, 7 years ago, we heard about this wonderful stop, and we took a little road trip. And I don't know whether Nick remembers us, but Nick took us around the building. We were so thrilled to see what was happening there that we wanted to bring that back to Hamilton. And so we started doing that on a very small level until this wonderful opportunity came around.
Great setup.
Thank you.
So Nick, talk to us a little bit about your history with food, and let me set it up this way.
Sure.
Food banks play an important role in this community, but for anybody that's ever experienced them, there's a stigma attached, and often it's not a particularly redeeming experience. And you started in that business, but your thinking and your delivery has dramatically changed the shape of how people intersect with food, and it started in Toronto in your neighborhood, so tell us about that.
Well, it started through a very simple act, which was simply listening to what our community had to say. And they were pretty clear that they didn't want to stand in a line, run the gauntlet of questions, get to the front of that line, and be handed not very healthy food and go home, leaving smaller for the experience and diminished. And by listening, we started to say, well, food is this incredible force in our lives. It's about health, it's about dignity, it's about sharing stories and cultures through food. If you grow it sustainably, you nurture the soil and the planet. And if everyone has access to good food, you have great communities. So through that listening, we started to develop programs that were less stigmatizing and more participatory: community kitchens, community gardens, fresh market stands, after-school programs for kids, and always anchored around this idea that whatever we serve in our centers, it has to be the utmost of quality. Good food all the time. And we often say never underestimate the power of a great meal cooked with love and eaten with others. And that's the kind of journey that many people go on when they arrive in one of our centers. Hamilton is but one of 8 now, and we're growing them as fast and furious as we possibly can.
So 6 in operation now across the country, Calgary and Hamilton to follow. Just
Right.
Let's start with, we don't want to spend a lot of time on Calgary, but talk about why Calgary and then Hamilton. What are the dynamics that make a jurisdiction ready
Well,
to host
the truth
food
is
center?
any community could have a community food center because there's need across this country. 4 million of our fellow citizens are struggling to put food on their table or missing meals so their kids can eat. So there is a major crisis when it comes to food, and that's obviously related to income and inequality and poverty. So in the case of Hamilton, we did a call for proposals across Ontario, and Hamilton had an incredible response to that. I've always been a big fan of Hamilton. The Poverty Roundtable work here, the Hamilton Foundation is well known across the country. This is a community where there is need, but there's a sense that we're going to do something about that. Very, very active. And in terms of neighbor to neighbor, great leadership, philosophical alignment. And it wasn't about charity, it was about solidarity and obviously need in the neighborhood that they operate in. So that's what we're looking for, is to try and find a marriage between good local resources and also some of the experience we have around program development and design, metrics and evaluation, which is very important to our model, and also fundraising and communications. And it's that coming together that creates a rooted, resilient, reflective of the needs of the community food center. So so Hamilton just stood out as a place that we wanted to be in. Calgary, similarly, we were looking for a community that, as I've just described, had all of those attributes and certainly need everywhere. And the Calgary Centre is just slightly ahead of Hamilton. It opened not to the public yet, but they've done most of the physical renovation, and it is a beautiful space. And this is a key piece of the model, that the physical determines the social. We want to build really beautiful places that people can be in and start to reimagine themselves and build a sense of hope and self-worth. And you can do that through great food.
For sure. And great architecture. And a great place.
Yeah. So we're totally excited about what's going to happen in Hamilton.
So let's drill down a little bit into where you're at, because right now you have a location. I'd like you to describe that, talk about the process that you're going through. Obviously there's a gap still to be filled between realizing the dream of a Hamilton created food center and where you're at now, but tell us the story.
So our location is going to be at 310 Lime Ridge. We have 6,000 square feet just waiting for us to get in and build on. We're actually ready to do that very shortly. It is going to be a wonderful space with a big commercial kitchen in it, and in that commercial kitchen, as Nick said, we'll be able to provide great healthy food, but also people will be able to learn food skills around that kitchen as well. We'll have congregate dining for over 100 people and breakout rooms for our social action committees. So we're truly excited. We're working with the Ralston neighborhood group right now, and they're looking forward to being part of that space, and it's truly an exciting time for us.
And you're going to launch a capital campaign because there's still a target that has to be met and trees to be shaken. We
have a capital campaign of $4 million. We're at 1.8 at this point in time, so we're just out of the gate, which means we're really doing well. John Evans is kindly agreed to be our campaign chairperson, and we have a wonderful committee surrounding him, so we feel really positive in the direction we're going in right now.
And the city has been phenomenal as well.
Amazing.
Mayor Eisenberger has been terrific, and that was another thing that we were looking for, that municipal buy-in.
Right.
So Hamilton is an amazing place that we're thrilled to be working with Neighbor to Neighbor to bring this to life.
So you've finally gotten over the negative experiences in your basketball playing career of coming to Hamilton.
I did
meeting a somewhat hostile environment.
We did lose to Mac one point way back in the 80s. Once, no.
Joe Rasso will be calling in momentarily to correct the record, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, trouble.
I want to build on a comment that Denise made about her social action committees, because one of the things that struck me when I read your book that focused a lot on the lives that you'd changed was that you, as an organization, you don't shy away from the importance of advocacy and public policy and the difference that makes. That what you're doing is clearly transformative, makes a difference, but it has to be married with some broader interaction with governments, with engaged citizens, with advocates, and others. And I want you to talk about that, because often, for those of us in the charitable sector, that's a interesting and challenging bit of diplomacy.
Sure. Well, people aren't hungry because there isn't enough food out there. There's plenty of food, and all the studies suggest we throw out about 30 or 40% of the food we produce. So people are hungry because of low minimum wages and inadequate social assistance rates, unaffordable child care, housing that's way too expensive. And I think it's incumbent upon organizations that work in frontline capacities with low-income communities to be speaking out about those larger issues too. And most importantly, having those who are most affected leading the charge. And so I'm really proud of the fact that every one of the community food centers, we ensure that there's at least one full-time staff person that's trying to animate those larger conversations. I mean, for example, in Dartmouth, they're working on voter turnout, low voter turnout in their neighborhood. And I think that will lead to more purchase on those politicians listening to them and saying, boy, we got to change X, Y, or Z. What that will be, or what the issues will, how they will manifest themselves in Hamilton, will be up to Hamilton to decide through a process of listening to their community, which is the way I started this conversation. You have to listen. But the politics are really, really critical. And I don't mean partisan politics. I don't mean throwing a brick through a window. I mean mobilizing our fellow citizens to say this is not right, that so many of us aren't at the table. And we should create resources to ensure that those conversations are happening and bring politicians to the table with a strong civil society to push on whatever door requires being pushed on.
Yeah, I always find it fascinating as a former elected official that anybody that's been in that business and run campaigns well knows that you have a limited amount of time as a candidate and resources, and inevitably you go to higher turnout polls and places that have a history of engagement. And inevitably, whether consciously or unconsciously, that discounts the votes of people who are often living in poverty. And that's why in so much of our work with the Roundtable and in our neighborhood planning work, the voices of lived experience have to come first if we're going to be successful. And I think that's played very well in Hamilton. We have a much different and more engaged series of neighborhoods and communities than we would have had a decade or more ago. And I think that, again, bodes well for the work that you're trying to do.
Absolutely. And you know what, even as we moved along and we've gotten to know our clients as they come in, we find that people that are recently laid off, they're still talking. They still voice their needs, their concerns, their beliefs. But as months drag on and they don't get returned to work, they lose their voice. And we've got to encourage them to use that voice, and the only way we're going to do that is by engaging them.
Well, the lived experience stuff, which you've done so well in Hamilton, it really is a leader looking from outside in terms of influencing the country. Joe Public often thinks that people are poor because they choose to be poor, or it's a character flaw, it's not able to budget. I mean, that's just so far from the truth. And I think the more we project those frontline stories of people who are working 2 or 3 jobs and trying to battle across town to make a living and get back, we tell those stories, people working really, really hard to try and keep it together. Those are the stories that I think have huge influence on people, and we need to foreground those stories. And I really believe that you need to create places that foreground dignity and health and create a platform for people to tell their stories, to say, this is what needs to change. These are my hopes and dreams. I have hopes and dreams, and we can change this together. And I used to work a bit in politics, and the oxygen for change are people.
Exactly.
It's us. And so we need to find the courage to speak out, all of us, regardless of where we sit within a city or a province or a country. So it's important.
The other thing that I think you speak to is the need to integrate our experiences, and that this is not a segregated place that just people living in poverty would attend to. This is a place that will host a cross-section of people from very widely disparate demographics who will come together, share a meal, share an experience, perhaps commit to a social cause, and feel a sense of kinship that maybe in our fractured neighborhoods and lives we don't always get exposure to, because increasingly, people are commuters, or they're overly taxed, or they don't live in neighborhoods where they necessarily come across people who are struggling with some of the challenges that people in poverty struggle with, and maybe then don't have that sense of identification. And I think that's one of the unique attributes of what you're creating together here.
Well, food sits at the heart of some of the seemingly intractable issues of our time, from climate change to social isolation and lack of belonging to poor health and chronic disease issues, diabetes, obesity, heart disease just going off the roof. And of course, we talked about how many of our fellow citizens struggle to put food on their table. So we all eat. It's something that we can come together around, and then incredible conversations can happen. And I think that will be the case.
And I think the Community Food Center will also attract individuals that we presently are not attracting into our services. I'll cite the Ontario Energy Support Program that we have. We have quite a few senior women that could utilize our food bank services, but flatly refuse to do that. So, but they will come into a place where they're with their friends, and they're socializing, and they're getting great healthy food, and they're getting involved in wellness programs. They'll do that.
Sorry. Well, I just think of all that, like from farmers to engaged eaters. There's just a new conversation about food. So those are other allies to bring into the conversation about how do we build good, connected cities. So I think there's a ton of potential.
Great segue to my break. Good connected cities. Nick Saul from Community Food Centers Canada. See, I only slipped on that marginally. And Denise Arkell from Neighbor to Neighbor. You're watching Terry Cook. This is Hamilton's Vital Signs. We'll be right back talking about why food matters.
When you're not paying attention behind the wheel, things can happen fast. Driving distracted, it's like you're not there. In Ontario, one person is injured in a distracted driving collision every 30 minutes. Since the year 2000, deaths caused by distracted driving collisions have more than doubled, and distracted driving collisions have become the leading cause of death on Ontario roads. Drivers involved in those collisions may have been checking a playlist or listening to loud music. They could have been eating or using their GPS to find directions. In every case, they were distracted from driving. Any moment your eyes are off the road or your hands are off the wheel, even for a split second, you're putting your life and the lives of others in danger. If you let your mind wander when you're behind the wheel, it's like you are not there. Avoid all distractions while driving, no matter how small or brief they may seem. Stay focused, keep your eyes on the road, and be there.
We're back. I'm Terry Cook. You're watching Hamilton's Vital Signs. We're talking about why food matters with Nick Saul and Denise Arkell. And as always, I want to do an exit stage left Snagglepuss and ask, how did you come to be involved in the work that you're doing, and how does that inform kind of your ongoing commitment to making a difference in the world of food?
So interestingly enough, my path is quite convoluted. I graduated in recreation. Started working with the low-income community when I worked in Niagara Falls, and noticed that there wasn't a lot of recreational opportunities available to people in low-income situations. So started really fighting with that, and actually developed a fitness life skills program for low-income women at that point in time, which really was the first of its kind across Ontario. When I talked to other recreation people, they would indicate that they'd like to see more of that. So that was my entry into low income, but my background really is a family business. My dad owned a food processing company in Grimsby and one in Niagara-on-the-Lake. My grandfather had 3 grocery stores during the Depression right in Hamilton. So I think somehow I inherited this love of food.
There's karma.
Yeah, there must be. Yeah.
And?
Well, I come from a family that was very committed to doing community work. So around the dinner table, we always knew the world was much bigger than that table. At university, I studied history, but mostly social history, so not kings and queens, but history from the bottom up, peasants and laborers. And then I worked a bit in politics, but landed in the NGO sector, organizing tenants in public housing. Then I worked with homeless men on the east side of Toronto to help them come out of the ravines and into transitional housing and then more stable, affordable housing. And then I just answered a job posting to what was then the food bank, Stop 103 it was called back then, with not terrible, I didn't really know what I was getting myself into. And then I worked there for 14 years. And most of it was driven by this idea that there's a dignity about food. And people have to be at that table eat really well and look up from that meal and say, what are the myriad of ways I can get involved here? But it really started from a justice and dignity perspective. We all have the right to healthy food. We all have the right to be treated with dignity. And when you go down that road and you listen well to communities, you start to build what they want. And so, yeah, I've been happily ensconced in this sector for a long, long time now.
So on the listening well front, you're in the process of listening to this community in terms of the program offerings that will be part of making this dynamic new food center in Hamilton on the West Mountain come to life. Talk to us about that.
Well, we've actually gone to 70 different organizations to talk about where they see some weaknesses in our city in terms of food provision. And so we're getting feedback a lot from a lot of the health-related organizations, which has been very, very helpful to us. We've talked to the Diabetic Association. Population Health Research is wanting to get more involved with us, so we're really, truly excited about that. The YWCA, we've had conversations with them about how we can collaborate together to put on programs that will be available in the wellness area for our clients. So we're going through the process, we're listening. A report actually will be out by the end of June with regards to some of the findings on what they want to see in this community food center.
Very good. Nick, talk to us about what innovations you're seeing on the programmatic side in some of your centers across the country.
Well, I want to kind of riff a bit on what you said about the programs in your question, and we really think evaluation is very, very important. So we've spent a lot of time at Community Food Centers Canada, the national organization, to invest in a research framework. And it ranges from everything from increasing people's access to healthy food to increasing skills and behaviors around healthy food with an outcome of healthier lives and healthier people, increasing social connection to have an impact on people's mental health, and then the civic engagement piece to support people to meet with their MPs and MPPs and MLAs to say this is what we need in our community. So last year we did a 400-person annual program survey across all our centers, and it was very revealing in terms of the success of the programming. We're really excited to bring those evaluation systems to the Community Food Center here in Hamilton. 82% of people who responded said they'd made a friend through the center that they'd been able to sustain outside of the center. Really, really important. 62% or 66% said that they had increased their physical and mental health through this. So there's a lot of indicators that we're tracking. Home cooked meals is up. Access to fruits and vegetables is up. We run a great program called Food Fit, which is a cooking, nutrition, and exercise initiative that we hope will land eventually here. So we're creating content that we can put out into the centers, and then we also listen really hard to what might work in the center itself. And so from Dartmouth to Calgary, we're really taking seriously that if you invest with us, either from the private sector or the public sector, and the Public Health Agency of Canada has been very helpful to us, we need to show a return on that investment. And so those measurement systems will be in full force as we collaborate with Denise and company here. So that's exciting. I think we sometimes in our sector, we certainly shy away from civic engagement and public policy stuff, but we also, I think, need to up our game because we make incredible differences in people's lives. And you might articulate that through storytelling, for sure. You might articulate that through quantitative stuff, but behavior change is a big piece of it. And we want to show that if you start a program, if you're a diabetic and you start a program and you go through it for 12, 15 weeks, that we're going to have an impact. And I think that's really important for our sector. We do incredible work, and I don't think we get enough attention for the work that we do in terms of keeping cities together. So yeah, that's exciting from our perspective. We're really excited to bring that and up the game in the food domain.
So sadly, we're down to the last 2 minutes, and the great secret in this work, I find, is that we often talk about the people we get to help and the experiences we're exposed to. We don't often talk about how our lives have been changed or inspired by the people we meet in the course of our work. And I'd just like each of you to share with us a story from the work that you've done at Neighbor to Neighbor, at Community Food Centers Canada, that has changed your perspective and your sense of what's possible.
Oops. I think one of the stories that really sticks out with me is more related to the single moms, where there's not a lot of support for single moms out there, single dads probably as well. They're the 24/7 individuals that really are very much isolated, and as a result have a lot of negative things happening to them in their lives. And I admire what often I hear is how they've gone through some very, very difficult times, but in the end are able to get through that. And being a single mom myself with resources, I know how difficult it is to go through as a single mom. But when you don't have those resources, I'm so impressed how courageous and how resourceful and how determined these women are to succeed, and succeed for their children. So there's just not one. There's like a lot. Close to 40% of the women that come or families that come through our door are single moms.
Thank you.
Well, I could stay on that single mom theme. I mean, we've seen so many. I've seen so many people over the years that have inspired me. I think of my friend Nadia, who's a good friend now, but she was fleeing an abusive relationship many years ago and found herself in one of our programs and righted the ship. In fact, through our civic engagement work, where she started to see that her poverty wasn't her own fault; it was part of a system, and that gave her voice and volume and vigor and determination, and she became one of the fiercest champions for an increase in social assistance rates, which we desperately need in this province. You can't live with any kind of dignity and health on the social assistance rates that we currently have. And I think of her all the time. She became a volunteer. We hired her back after going through her community worker program. She then went back to school to become a nurse, and now she wants to become an RN and be a street nurse. So I saw her a couple weeks ago, and she is a mom of 3 incredible kids, and she's fierce. She doesn't take anything from anyone, and well, how can you not be inspired by
There's
that?
so many more stories, right?
Of course.
There's so
of
many
course.
more stories.
And the next time we get together, we'll talk about how we're creating an even better and more inspiring narrative with the opening of the Community Food Center,
It's going to be exciting.
Neighbor to Neighbor Center in Hamilton.
Very much looking forward to that.
Can't wait. Thank you both for being with me. Nick Saul from Community Food Centers Canada, Denise Arkell from Neighbor to Neighbor. We've been talking about why food matters. I'm Terry Cook. This is Vital Signs Hamilton. You can follow us on Facebook or Twitter. We hope you'll join us again in the fall. It has been my pleasure to have you here and to commend you on the work you're doing.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Terry.
Terry.
That's a wrap.
Yeah.